the red-pilled analysis of Adam and Eve. Theological, symbolic, and subversive truths, 5,000 characters. The story of Adam and Eve in Genesis 2-3 is often read as a simple morality tale about obedience and sin, but a red-pilled theological analysis reveals much more. A symbolic unveiling of power structures, gender dynamics, divine authority, and hidden esoteric truths. Beneath the surface, this myth encodes rebellion, hierarchy, knowledge suppression, and the initiation of man into suffering, but also consciousness. Let's explore this through a red-pilled lens, challenging mainstream religious and secular interpretations alike. The garden as controlled matrix. Eden is often portrayed as a paradise, but look closer. It's a controlled environment, tightly surveilled by a jealous God who restricts knowledge. Adam is placed there to till it and keep it, not to lounge in eternal bliss. He's a gardener, a steward, a worker. The tree of knowledge and the tree of life sit at the center of the garden. Yet God forbids Adam and Eve from accessing their fruits. Why put forbidden fruit in reach? This is not a paradise. It's a proto-matrix, a closed system of innocence and ignorance. The first red pill is knowledge. The serpent does not lie when he says, "Your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods." This is exactly what happens. Eve and Adam's eyes are opened after eating the fruit. They become self-aware, conscious of themselves, sexuality, mortality, and morality. What is being punished here is not sin, but awakening. This is a critical inversion. In red pill thought, awakening is painful, but liberating. The expulsion from Eden is not a fall from grace, but an escape from tyranny. Eve, the first rebel, or the first pawn. Eve, created from Adam's rib, is framed as a helper, secondary and derivative. She is the first woman, yet also the first to defy divine command. But was she a feminist archetype, or was she manipulated? In red pill terms, Eve is not a rebel so much as an instrument of subversion. The serpent doesn't go to Adam. He goes to Eve. Why? Because Eve represents emotion, persuasion, and susceptibility. She is the perfect infiltration point to dismantle divine order. She is not the villain, but she is a pawn in a higher battle, possibly between Wyadyut and a more ancient Gnostic principle of Sophia, wisdom, or even Lucifer. Eve then becomes the vehicle for Adam's downfall, not maliciously, but through feminine influence. She eats first. She gives the fruit to Adam. This dynamic is echoed throughout history. Men being brought down not by force, but by manipulation, seduction, or emotional appeal. The fall of man is a fall to woman's persuasion, a recurring theme in red pill theology. The serpent as the liberator. The serpent is traditionally demonized as Satan, but Gnostic texts view the serpent as a bringer of light, an emancipator. In red-pilled thinking, truth is often labeled heresy by those in power. The serpent doesn't use force, he uses reason. He challenges the official narrative. Did God really say, "You shall not eat of any tree"? The serpent offers choice. He's the first free thinker. He is Prometheus. He is the adversary not of man, but of authoritarianism. And crucially, he tells the truth. God even confirms it after the fall. Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. The serpent is the red pill itself. Dangerous, forbidden, liberating. Thakisim, the banishment and the price of knowledge. After their awakening, Adam and Eve are cursed, not just punished, but forced into reality. Eve gets pain in childbirth and is subordinated to man. Adam is condemned to toil for survival. These are not arbitrary punishments. They reflect the human condition post-awareness. To know is to suffer. To awaken is to be burdened. God blocks access to the tree of life with cherubim and flaming swords. This is symbolic. Once awakened, mankind can never return to ignorance. The gates are closed forever. In red-pilled theology, this is the point of no return. When you see behind the curtain, there's no going back. But is this a curse or a blessing? A blue-pilled reader mourns the loss of Eden. A red-pilled reader celebrates the birth of consciousness and masculine agency. No longer passive in the garden, man must now carve meaning, build civilization, and face death head-on. This is the forging of kings, not comfort. V. Theological implications. God, demiurge, or tyrant. Who is the God of Eden? In mainstream Christian theology, he is the omnibenevolent creator. But in red-pilled and Gnostic readings, he resembles the demiurge, a jealous, insecure being who hoards knowledge. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, he warns, not because there are none, but because he demands exclusive loyalty. This God fears man's potential, lest he also take from the tree of life and live forever. The goal isn't punishment, it's containment. Just as modern systems, analysis at a PhD level, analyzing the content that was just presented in the video, and that is how we will conclude, is with a PhD level analysis. So sit back and enjoy for the next few minutes as we dive a bit deeper into the concept. The story of Adam and Eve, found in Genesis 2-3, is one of the most archetypal and symbolically dense narratives in the Judeo-Christian tradition. It forms the cornerstone of Christian doctrines such as original sin. Yet it also transcends its religious context to reflect broader themes of human identity, moral consciousness, and the dialectic of freedom and obedience. A comprehensive analysis requires a multidisciplinary approach, incorporating ancient Near Eastern mythology, literary structure, theological interpretation, and philosophical anthropology. Textual structure and literary form. The Adam and Eve narrative is split into two primary pericopes: the formation of humanity, Genesis 2, and the transgression in Eden, Genesis 3. These chapters derive from the Yahwist, J source, written circa 10th century BCE. Unlike Genesis 1, from the priestly source, which presents a cosmic ordered creation, Genesis 2-3 is anthropocentric and intimate, portraying God as a craftsman forming man from dust, afar, and breathing into his nostrils the breath of life, neshama. The narrative structure is a classic chiasmus, with Eden at the center. The plot progresses from harmony and naming, Gen 2:19-20, to temptation and fall, Gen 3, to the expulsion from the garden, restoring a new order based on estrangement. The serpent woman man God interrogation sequence, Gen 3:9-13, mirrors the judgment sequence in reverse, suggesting moral symmetry but also tragic inversion. Theological themes, free will, and moral knowledge. Central to the narrative is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which symbolizes not merely ethical knowledge, but the autonomy of moral judgment, apart from divine command. Adam and Eve are not punished for acquiring knowledge per se. Indeed, the text hints that God acknowledges their new moral awareness, Gen 3:22, but for transgressing a divine boundary. The act marks a rupture in the divine-human relationship, with autonomy asserted over obedience. However, Jewish tradition, notably Maimonides, emphasizes the acquisition of rational moral discernment. The rabbinic term, Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is not innate depravity, but a necessary, channelable impulse, gender, and hierarchy. The creation of Eve from Adam's rib, Selah, has often been misused to justify patriarchal dominance. However, the Hebrew word can also mean side, suggesting partnership. The initial declaration, Ezer Kenegdo, a helper corresponding to him, implies equality, not subordination. The later rule over you, Gen 3:16, is a consequence of sin, not a creation ordinance. Feminist theologians like Phyllis Treibel and Carol Myers have argued that patriarchy emerges from the fall, not from divine intent. Theodicy and alienation, the expulsion from Eden, explains why suffering, toil, and death exist in the world. A theodicy through narrative, Adam must toil in cursed soil. Eve experiences pain in childbirth. The serpent crawls in dust. But these curses are not absolute. Clothing is provided, life continues, and Eden's gate is guarded, not destroyed, implying a future eschatological restoration, echoed in Revelation 22. Symbolic and psychological interpretation. Jungian and Freudian readings find in Genesis 3 a symbolic coming-of-age tale. The garden is a state of pre-conscious innocence. The fruit represents the emergence of ego and self-awareness. The knowledge of good and evil is not sexual awakening per se, but a binary moral consciousness, a necessary part of individuation. The serpent, as trickster archetype, introduces dialectic, ambivalence, ambiguity, and choice. The sense of nakedness is also symbolic. In ancient Semitic cultures, nudity conveyed vulnerability and shame only in the context of guilt or exile. Their clothing, made of animal skins, marks the beginning of civilization, even as it signals a loss of paradise. Political and cultural subtext. Some scholars argue Genesis 2-3 is a post-exilic critique of Babylonian priestly power and goddess worship. The serpent sacred in Mesopotamian cults, e.g., Ningish Zida, is demoted to deceiver. The woman's elevated role in ancient fertility cults is diminished here. Thus, the Eden story subtly replaces Mesopotamian mythic theology with a monotheistic moral framework. YHWH alone gives life, law, and land. Additionally, Adam, Hebrew, Adam, is not a proper name originally, but a term meaning human or earthling, from the ground. Adamah, Eve, Hawa, is mother of all living, positioning her as the prototype of civilization, not merely as a temptress. Their names are mythopoeic, not biographical. Hello, sir. Here is a red-pilled theological analysis of the Adam and Eve story. This is important narrative supplement. Red-pilled theology. The hidden truth behind Adam and Eve. The story of Adam and Eve in Genesis is often presented as a tale of disobedience, sin, and exile. But through a red-pilled lens, it becomes something far deeper. A coded narrative about power, control, awakening, and the war between divine authority and human autonomy. This isn't just a morality tale. It's the first act of the human struggle against a system of suppression. 1. Eden, a controlled matrix, not a paradise. At first glance, Eden appears to be paradise. But ask yourself, why place the tree of knowledge in the center if it's forbidden? Why design a perfect world with a fatal trap? Eden is not paradise. It's a containment zone. Adam is told to work and keep it. He's not lounging. He's laboring. He's under watch. This is a proto-matrix, where ignorance equals innocence and obedience is rewarded with comfort. The tree of knowledge is the original red pill. When Eve and Adam eat the fruit, their eyes were opened. They awaken, not just morally, but existentially. They become self-aware. They realize shame, death, sexuality, and agency. The cost of truth is exile, but also liberation. 2. Eve, rebel, pawn, or catalyst. Eve is often cast as the villain, but from a red-pilled view, she's either the first rebel or the first pawn. The serpent approaches her, not Adam. Why? Because Eve represents emotional influence and persuasive power. She's more easily persuaded, an archetype that persists in red pill philosophy about female susceptibility to social manipulation. Eve eats the fruit, then convinces Adam to do the same. This dynamic, woman leading man into rebellion, is symbolic. It reflects a recurring pattern, the power of feminine persuasion in subverting established order. Adam, passive, follows. Eve acts, whether victim or conspirator. Eve becomes the first catalyst for awakening and collapse. 3. The serpent, adversary or liberator. The serpent is labeled Satan, but he never lies. He says eating the fruit will open their eyes, and it does. He offers Eve the choice to awaken. He doesn't force her. He reasons with her. In red-pilled terms, the serpent is the first dissident, the first free thinker. He questions authority, speaks truth, and enables choice. He represents forbidden knowledge, just like those who challenge mainstream systems today. Red pill thinkers often face ridicule not for being wrong, but for challenging the narrative. In this sense, the serpent is not evil. He's the bringer of consciousness, like Prometheus or Lucifer in the Gnostic tradition. 4. The real punishment. Awakening. After the fruit is eaten, Adam and Eve are cursed. But the curses are just the price of knowledge. They now understand the pain of existence. Labor, childbirth, mortality. These aren't arbitrary punishments. They are the terms of the awakened world. The illusion is shattered. They are thrust into reality. God blocks access to the tree of life, ensuring man will suffer and die. But why? Because eternal life with awakened consciousness would make man truly divine. God says, "Behold, the man has become like one of us." The divine fear is not disobedience. It's equality. Man is punished for gaining the knowledge God hoarded. 5. He doesn't guide man toward enlightenment. He hides it. This aligns not with a benevolent creator, but with the demiurge of Gnostic tradition, a false god who traps souls in ignorance and punishes truth seekers. This god enforces hierarchy, denies autonomy, and reacts to awakening with rage. He expels man from Eden, not out of justice, but self-preservation. 6. Gender, order, and the cost of reversal. After the fall, Eve is cursed. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. This isn't just punishment. It's a reimposition of natural order. The red-pilled view sees gender roles as reflections of natural law, not social constructs. When Adam follows, collapse ensues. The lesson is simple. Masculine authority must lead. Feminine influence, when unchecked, opens the door to subversion, not through malice, but through emotional appeal. The fall of man is not just spiritual, it's structural. It's about the cost of misaligned hierarchy. 7. Eden today, the war for the mind. The Eden story is more relevant than ever. Modern systems, media, education, government function like Eden. Comfort in exchange for ignorance. Disobedience punished. Truth censored. The serpent today is anyone who dares to ask, did they really say that? The fruit is forbidden knowledge, and the garden, a pretty cage. Awakening today comes with a price. Isolation, resistance, pain. But like Adam,
the story of Eve eating the apple in the Garden of Eden is found in Genesis 3 of the Bible. While tradition has often interpreted the fruit as an apple, the text itself simply calls it the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Here's a direct breakdown of what happened and how your question can be explored from both canonical and esoteric Taos traditional perspectives. Biblical, canonical version, Genesis 3. Satan, in the form of a serpent, tempts Eve by saying she will not die if she eats the fruit, but will be like God, knowing good and evil. Eve sees that the fruit is good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. She eats it, then gives some to Adam. There is no explicit mention of Eve giving something to Satan in return. The act is portrayed as disobedience to God's command, not a transactional deal. Esoteric, Gnostic interpretations, in alternative traditions, such as Gnosticism, Kabbalistic lore, or later occult interpretations, the story can carry additional meanings. 1. Gnostic view. Some Gnostic texts reverse the roles. The serpent is seen as a bringer of enlightenment, and Yahweh is the jealous demiurge who keeps humanity ignorant. In this reading, Eve's deal is more like accepting forbidden knowledge or aligning with a liberator, not Satan in the traditional sense. Mystical Jewish and Christian lore. Some midrashic or mystical interpretations suggest the serpent seduced Eve. Some even say sexually. This is not in the Bible, but appears in apocryphal and folkloric traditions. In some Christian demonological traditions, Eve's act allowed Satan to gain a foothold in humanity, interpreted as opening the gates of sin and death to the world. What did Eve give in return? If you interpret the story symbolically or spiritually, she gave her innocence and trust in God's word. She invited self-awareness, desire, shame, and eventually mortality into human experience. She gave Satan influence over humanity according to Christian theology, Romans 5:12. In esoteric terms, some argue she offered the human soul or spiritual essence as a cost of knowledge. In occult or Luciferian interpretations, knowledge itself is the currency. Deeper symbolism. The fruit. Forbidden knowledge, power, sexual awakening, or spiritual autonomy. Satan, the serpent. Trickster, liberator, adversary, or inner ego. Eve the human soul or divine feminine. But if you're working on a fictional or symbolic retelling, which you've done before, you might frame Eve's gift to Satan not as a physical exchange, but something more profound. The awakening of self-awareness, loss of divine protection, or even the willingness to seek forbidden truth, which in some esoteric frameworks is seen as the first act of rebellion against spiritual ignorance. Would you like me to write a dramatized or mythological version of this as a script or graphic novel passage?